Hey there folks, and welcome to the second video for chapter 34. Please pardon the typo on the title. It is chapter 34, The Biosphere, an Introduction to Earth's Diverse Environments. So in the first half of chapter 34, we were discussing what makes a biome. What do we study in ecology when we're looking at a biome? And we were looking at marine biomes, or at least aquatic biomes. But now I'd like to shift gears. Let's look at the land. When we look at a map of the Earth, because of the prevailing biome-creating factors on this planet, winds carrying warm or cold air, damp or dry air, and the ocean's currents, which help carry warm or cold water all over the planet, we get bands of different temperatures and different types of habitats all over the planet, from north to south. We get in the northern hemisphere, we tend to get cooler areas. We get both dry and damp, but they tend by and large to be colder areas, cooler areas. From the tropics south, we tend to get hotter, warmer areas. Again, both wet and tropical and very dry and desert-like are both capable. But we're going to be going over what kinds of basic types of biomes do we find on this planet, and where are you likely to find them, and what defines them? All right, when we are looking at tropical forests, we're looking near the equator. All right, around the equator, you see this wide band of bright green. You're looking for this color. So see that down through Central America, South America, right next to it, if you go straight across, through Africa, and through Asia and Micronesia. Things like the Philippines, the southern tip of India, Thailand, and Indonesia. These areas receive both a lot of warm air and a lot of damp air. And we get tropical forests this way. Big, tall trees, nice, wet, humid, lush growth, located right around that equator, right around the center of the planet. If you head top and bottom of it, though, we get savannas. Savannas are tropical grasslands, so warm but dry. Look for this kind of gold-orange color. See how that long swath all around Africa, this swath here through South America, these are like the Pampas in Argentina, or part of the Pampas. California, look a little from there. Ever driven out to some of our local hillsides? Grass, tons of grassland. Areas of Texas, also a lot of inland India, Thailand, Spain, and the Mediterranean. All right, this is frequently where we find an area called the Mediterranean environment, Mediterranean climate. Dry, very warm. You may get some tropical grassland, but generally what we're saying is a lot of grassland with few trees. There are trees, but few trees. If you want fewer trees than that, now we're talking desert. Straight up desert. It's dry. That's this bright yellow color we're looking at. This area over here by California, this will be the Mojave Desert leading down into the Chihuahua Desert. We've got the Sahara, that is famous for being a sea of dunes up in northern Africa. And we get the outback of Australia, which is also incredibly dry and desertous. That's not the only thing we get in our area, though. We also get chaparral. Now, this is something that we especially get locally. This is a Southern California thing. You can get something similar to chaparral in the Mediterranean areas like around Greece and southern Italy, as well as parts of Spain. But chaparral is specifically something that Southern California is known for. So if desert is defined by how dry it is, down in the chaparral, this is practically our backyard. This is where I conduct a lot of research and chaparral and its related habitats. Chaparral is defined by spiny shrubs, things that can be actually surprisingly big, up to your waist or your hip, maybe even taller when we get rain, that are extremely well drought adapted. Chaparral is almost as dry as the desert, but you get a lot more obvious big plant life because you get a little more rain and a lot of plants that are incredibly well adapted to living in the dry. Heading a little bit further out, we get temperate grasslands. Now, we talked about tropical grasslands. Temperate grasslands are things like the classic Midwest of the United States, of North America, the American prairie, where American bison used to roam, and still roam in some areas. You also get down into Argentina, where you get the pampas, or the central steppes, like Mongolia and Asia, and so also some areas of Australia. But one of the best known and best studied is here in North America. It's the North American prairie. Vast seas of grass and wildflowers. If you get a little bit more water than that, you end up with things like temperate forests. That's this sort of blue-green shade here, and you get that a lot. Here's this band coming down. See, following the lakes? Follow the lakes, follow the water, down from Canada. A lot of the eastern half of the U.S., most of Europe also falls under this biome, as well as areas of China and most of Japan, not all of Japan. These tend to be dominated by broadleaf forests. These are also what we call deciduous forests. Deciduous trees are those that lose their leaves in the winter. They change colors in fall, and they lose their leaves in the winter and grow back all brand new leaves in the spring. Trees that don't do this are conifers. And we tend to get coniferous forests, things like pine trees, fir trees, spruce, that kind of thing. Things that look a lot like this. This gorgeous view. We get them at high altitude and in colder, wetter areas. Pardon. So you will get an overlap in temperate forest between broadleaf and coniferous forest. Typically has to do with how cold it's going to get and what altitude you're at. Other things you may see are temperate rainforests, where you get just tons of rain. Think Washington State, that whole edge of Canada, this whole area is going to be solidly temperate forest, and as well as temperate rainforest, depending on just how much rain they're going to get. If you get further north and even colder, you tend to leave the broadleaf forest behind. So if this is coniferous forest and this is more like rainforest, see how much greener and how much more undergrowth there is, enough water gets down to the ground to support it. Up here is going to be taiga. This is cold. Not as cold as it can get, but this is awfully cold. This is starting to shade into northern Russia, northern Canada. You don't get a lot of broadleaf trees. It's so cold. You want the extra cold adaptations that you get in conifers and their relatives. This is an area where that river is going to be frozen over, and anything else nearby. Does it get colder still? Why, yes. Yes, it does. Welcome to the tundra. The tundra is as far north a biome as you're going to get before we're pretty much solid ice. Tundras experience long, bitter cold winters. It is far north. It is completely dark for much of the year. Spring and summer are very brief, but when they arrive, they produce a riot of color, because all of the plants that wait, semi-frozen in the soil, all their seeds that are waiting to germinate, have a very short window where the temperature is actually high enough for them to do that. So when that brief little period, short spring, short summer, like maybe 2 weeks of summer every year, finally shows up, everything germinates, grows, and blooms at once, and it suddenly gets just exploded into a mass of color. There's a fantastic photo in your textbook of what the tundra looks like come springtime. This is what it looks like during the rest of the year. go refer to your textbook for what it looks like for that one moment. We actually get some color and a little bit of sunlight. If you head further north than tundra, tundra is where you'll find, Arctic foxes and extremely hardy, cold-resistant animals. You head further than tundra, north or south, you've hit polar ice. Both the Arctic and the Antarctic apply to this type of biome. Here's where you find, at the one end, polar bears coming down onto the tundra to hunt, but living out on the ice. And at the other end, down at the southern pole, here's where you find penguins huddling in their masses against freezing cold and freezing wind that makes it colder still. Right? And massive glaciers and sheets of ice. Those are melting. Slight problem. Why are they melting? Why are some of these things changing? Well, part of it is to do with the global water cycle. See, the way water gets cycled and moved all around the planet is basically this. We have vast amounts of water open and exposed to sunlight and sun heat in all of our oceans. There's only a teeny tiny part of the water on this planet that's actually fresh water. It's only about 3%. The rest of it's salt water. Most of it's exposed to sunlight, which heats up the surface of the ocean and causes some of it to evaporate up into the atmosphere. When it gets high enough, it starts to cool down. And when water cools down, it starts to condense from water vapor back into water liquid, into droplets. This is where we get rain, sleet, snow. What the water returns to the ground as depends on how cold it gets as it falls. And those prevailing winds that we talked about earlier carry water vapor all over the planet as it's condensing, and eventually it will fall as precipitation. If it's warmer as it's falling, it may fall as rain. If it freezes and melts as it's falling, we may get sleet or hail. If it gets cold and stays cold, it may come down as ice and snow. And that water is going to hit the surface of the earth again, and a number of things may happen to it. It may flow down into the ground. It may become part of groundwater storage. It may become part of groundwater flow, flowing under the surface of the ground. And it may feed springs and streams and rivers and lakes that way. It may eventually make its way back to the ocean. It may flow directly back down to the ocean if it doesn't get sunk down into the soil. This is called surface runoff. It may be absorbed by plants or by animals, and it may be stuck in plants and animals for a while until eventually we return to the rest of the cycle. But the more different parts of this cycle change, things like total temperature and how changing planet and climate temperature can shift wind currents and ocean currents, can change what kind of precipitation we're getting where, and what sort of precipitation ends up in what areas. So areas that may not be accustomed to getting a whole lot of snow may start to get more snow than usual because the planet's temperature for that region has been slowly shifting, and now they are getting cooler or colder wet air than they're accustomed to. All right, this is going to wrap it up for chapter 34, ladies and gentlemen, and I will see you next time. Bye, folks.